Mark here, Celtic Crossbows. Welcome back to some of my subscribers. Nice to see you guys back. And hello to you new guys tuning in. Today we're going to be looking at quarrels for your Accu ballista. Now some of you may not have the tools in your house, some of you do. For those of you who don't, I'm going to take you through the different methods, and for those of you who do as well. First of all, you need to determine the size of the shaft you want. And basically, you need to try in the barrel of your crossbow. You see where the string comes along the height of your shaft. It has to be halfway. Too low, it'll fling the bolt out. Too high in the back, it'll dig down in. It has to be sitting in the middle. So work out by using different sizes of dowel, odd pieces, to work out the size of shaft you need first, and then you need to work out the length. So the length is from where your quarrel sits between your roll nut. So you got the two teeth of the roll nut, that sits between the two teeth. So where it sits between a roll nut and to where the front of your quarrel is. If you haven't got a complete quarrel with you, you can't copy it, so therefore this is how you do it. Measure from where between the teeth of your roll nut to just shy or just over the front, literally 2 inches over the front of your prod. Okay, and that'll give you the overall length of your shaft. So whether you have a different size bodkin tip, a type 9, type 16, whatever tip you use, it'll tell you what size you need. If you want to use a fire quarrel, or a what's the word I'm looking for, incendiary quarrel, you need a longer shaft because it needs to be over the front of the bow and you don't want to burn in the front of your bow. Okay, so that's the first one, measuring the length of your shaft. So I'm going to bring in my crossbow now, as you can see what I'm talking about. Okay, and to determine the size of the bolt you need, measure from between the teeth of your roll nut to the front of your prod, or the tiller. If your bolt is placed in here, it goes between the teeth or fingers of your roll nut, and the tip of the bolt is just proud of your tiller. Now depending on what type of heads you use, whether you use a type 9, type 16, for those of you who are not familiar with different numbers, if you use like a armor piercing bodkin tip, or if you want to use a flat tip, cast iron, anything like that, you can have it just proud of your tiller. If you want to use a incendiary tip, you're going to need your shaft longer because you don't want it burning in the front of your tiller. So you want a longer shaft. Different shafts, different munitions. You get the idea. Okay guys, now you determine the length of your quarrel. Let's have a look at the diameter. Take your dowel or arrow or quarrel and put it in. If it's sitting too high up in the shaft, then your bolt is too small. If it's sitting in the bottom half of the shaft, it's too big. The string needs to be hitting in the middle. If it does not, if it hits in the top, it will fling it off downhill and give you a low center trajectory. Higher up, it does the reverse. It needs to be hitting the string in the middle of your quarrel. Okay, so for such a short arbalist, 4.5 to 5 inch quarrel is all you need. So you put the head on, be just sitting proud, and that's perfect for this size of crossbow. Okay, now we go back to the full size arbalist. Now the power stroke, again, is only about 4.5 inches. It doesn't mean you use the same size bolt as you would on a pistol arbalist, because the power is now great. This is double the power, 120 pounds. So you need your bolt. So he's sitting with this dowel, which already fits in nicely in the nut. You can, if you want, because the power stroke ends here, just have a bolt this long. But you'll be limited then to the size of tip you fit on your arrow shaft. If the shaft if you're using a large arrow shaft, say for example this type, a four-sided type, if the type precedes the diameter of the shaft, it'll cut into the barrel, and it'll reduce the efficiency of the bow. So you want to go something which is longer than the front of your crossbow, as you can use different type heads. If the head snaps off, you can use a different head. If the shaft breaks at the front, you've got more material there to refit the head, fit a new head. Okay? In any given era, there wasn't just one bolt and that was it. There was many different designs in a same era. For example, if you'd been a royal member and you was out on a hunt, you would have been using a higher quality bolt. Things like maybe the bolt head was individually hand finished to a much higher quality like this, rather than to a cheaper quality. Get a bit of light here like this. So put a bit more light on, see that helps. Rather than to a cheaper quality like this, it would have been a much superior quality like this. The flights, it would have been parchment, it would have been swan feather or goose feather or something like this. And not just turkey feather. Again, turkey was something which the common folk had. They would just sit around on a Friday or Saturday plucking a goose ready for dinner on Sunday. And the feathers would have been sold to the local traders, which was in turn then gone to the Royal Fletchers for producing the munitions. These flights then would have been chosen specifically by the royal members. They had a requirement, a specific requirement for their bolts of what the quality of the flights were. How many bindings per inch? Was they going to have a horn inserted in the knock? Although it was a flat knock, they would have still had down the grain, against the grain of the shaft, something like horn inserted to reinforce the shaft. They would have been sporting crossbows. The Germans had some amazing, intimately and intricately detailed crossbows inlaid with bone, ivory, pearl, superb engravings inlaid with black bone and things like this. So it wasn't just a munitions grade bolt, which is what this is. Think of it as ammunition, as you would use in a firearm. You have your military grade ammunition, munitions grade, which is just popped off in millions around a day. And then you have your hunter's ammunition, which is individually charged, weighed, sized. I shoot competition, and ourselves, we would individually weigh each pellet. We would then size each pellet. They'd be cleaned, lubricated, and out of a tin of say 500, or even the Crossman Premier 17.9 grains, no 7.95 grain, you might only use 10% of the pack. The rest would be discarded. So, but there was nothing wrong with the ammunition. You still use, same with these. They wasn't individually weighed, etc. They were just ammunition. Okay, so we discussed the length you need, we discussed the dimensions you need, and we discussed the density you need. Now what we're going to discuss now is the era that you want. This is for your LARP and reenactment people out there. A lot of people have the misconception that crossbows are still a modern piece of kit, whereas actually the Chinese had them around 750, 800 BC, the Greeks had them by 500 BC, and we know that the Celtics were in Delphi, where they sacked Rome in Delphi around about 450 BC. So the Welsh was well travelled then, back 450 BC. So we know that the native Britannics, the Welsh, had access to crossbow technology, or were aware of it, by 450 BC, because when they sacked Delphi, the Greeks already had the belly bow, and the Chinese had bronze crossbows by 700 BC. So with the bronze made crossbows, the Chinese would have been using well prepared shafts, same as archery arrows. They wouldn't have been rough and ready. they would have been well prepared. So depending on what era you're going to do, or what style of reenactment you're going to do, will depend on the finish and fit of your equipment. If you're going to use an arbalist crossbow, they use a very dense and heavy material like oak. This was needed because the limbs deliver a slow, heavy, hard-hitting projectile. Earlier crossbows had wooden limbs like elm or yew. Excuse me. But we also know that the Mongolians had laminated technology. Okay, so assuming we'll start from beginning 700 BC with the Chinese. They was using extremely advanced technology. They was using casted technology to make their crossbows, trigger mechanisms, etc. in a bronze casing. Unlike the later Roman roll-nut technology, which seemed to have lost 1,000 years of development, or almost 1,000 years. Their shafts would have been superior quality. A dense, heavy oak, very tight fibre for use on the crossbows. This was before the introduction of the Shukunu repeating crossbow, which was basically the original version of Jogue's modern retake on a 2,500-year-old design. So the Chinese was the first with that technology. Now, depending on the war at any given time, the shafts was made of high quality. They wasn't junk. They was right back then. It was all superior quality, handmade. It's only when munitions dropped low were shortcuts taken. Like the shafts was not cleaned off because they had to get the bolts and equipment out the front line faster. So the fitting of feathers, which took a long time to do to bind up. You take start to finish an hour a bolt, a blacksmith making the head, somebody straightening the shafts, a fletcher then putting the heads and everything on. Took a long time. So corners was cut, and sometimes hazel would have just been used straight, steamed over, straightened, cut back, and it was probably the first use of parchment flights, leather flights, and plywood flights to bring the speed of production down quicker, to get the munitions into battle quicker. Okay, so if feather was so time consuming and took so long to make a bolt or an arrow, why didn't they use something else? And the answer is quite simple. Paper or parchment at the time would have been something like 6 denarii, or over today, over £1,000 for a leaf. Paper took a long time to make, over a week. It was processed, cut down, refined, soaked, bleached, and put into storage, flattened, transported across great areas. It was a lot of money. It would have been, at least today, to quill an arrow, around with £50 per each arrow to produce. Now when you're dealing with an army, that was expensive. Corners had to be cut, and turkey feathers was cheap. Everybody ate bird. There was always feathers around, so only thing you had to pay for was the labour. And you usually got somebody like a young boy to do the feathers. Labour was cheap then. Other materials which was used later, because as the munitions was stored, they realised that the mites and everything in the stores would eat the feathers, and they took a long time to bind onto the shafts, and they would have to be cut off and bound again because the mites would eat and destroy the feathers. So they went over to things such as then using leather to make the flights, which was very good. Again, no, unfortunately, because it's organic, it would be eaten. So the final development by the 15th century would have been plyboard. Technology moved on by then. They had band saws, etc., or disc saws, which could actually cut fine layers of wood like this, which can be steamed and shaped to make a spiral in the feathers, in the quarrel. Okay, so now we're going to look at finisher shaft. As the era changed, the quality and materials used on the fletchings also changed. This is parchment. This probably came in around about the 3rd or 4th century AD UK. China had parchment way back in 1000 BC. It took a long time for that technology to arrive in Britain. The monks had it. They was using it up in Anglesey around about 200 BC. We know this because the monks recorded everything that they done in North Wales. Okay, so we're going to come to our head types now and materials, and what you're going to use for the era of LARP or crossbow you're going to use. Now, the earlier Roman types would have been using a tip similar to this, also carried well through into the 14th, 15th century by medieval troops. Later, more modern types become more like this. This is a steel tip, cut, ground, very pretty, very deadly, very accurate. Whereas a forged or hammered tip like this, the metals, was also very expensive. So a lot of your native bowyers, poachers, and poachers did use crossbows, although it was extremely expensive, would have still been using the likes of flint for their bow tips. Different types of flint. This one here is almost like glass. And this one then is a form of quartz. So they've been using different materials for their bow tips. They've been using bone, antler, wherever they get their hands on for their bow tips. So I think that's where we'll start our first bolt making. We've got a kettle behind. We've got some lovely hazel, which I have, and we're going to show you how to trim it down, straighten it to get that lovely finish. Now I got one here which I've already done to show you what kind of results you can get. So we'll just start it off with a shaft like this, all notched up. We've now got this lovely, almost perfectly flat shaft. It's got a little kink in the middle where I've been steaming it a little bit more. I've yet to take out, which is virtually perfect. So what I'm going to show you on the next video on trimming the shafts, straightening them, cutting your knock to fit your arrowheads, and fletching. If you want to go to the time and trouble of stripping your shafts, you can do. I personally don't think it's necessary. Here's a 15th century munitions grade bolt. You can see here, this is oak, I believe. It's just been stripped back on the sides, and that the outer bark is still in place, and it works perfectly fine. Or you can go with your log and strip it, clean it, sand it, and do everything you want. I honestly believe unless you're doing competition and you're going to take somebody out on the other side of the bridge, it's not going to make that much of a difference, my personal opinion. So this is what we're aiming for, and that's where we're going to start on the next video. Thanks and bye bye.